She sat in the third row at her husband's wedding, not weeping, not begging, not falling apart. She sat with perfect posture, in a sapphire blue suit, and she watched the man she had given 20 years of her life to exchange vows with another woman. And she smiled, because she knew something nobody else in that room knew. She knew that the company whose logo was printed on the catering invoice, the floral contract, and the venue lease, the empire her husband had spent 2 decades building and calling his own, belonged to her. Every share, every asset, every floor of the building they were standing in, 51.8%. Acquired quietly, patiently, invisibly, one careful step at a time over 20 years, while he was busy looking at the headlines and forgetting to read the fine print. And in exactly 1 hour, she was going to walk to that microphone and let him find out. In front of everyone who had ever mattered to him. This is the story of Serafina Calloway, the woman who was handed the role of background character and spent 2 decades quietly rewriting the entire script. Stay with us. Because what happens next will change how you think about patience, power, and the kind of strength that never announces itself until the moment it absolutely has to. The lesson this story carries. Real power is not built in loud moments. It is built in quiet ones, in the decisions you make when nobody is watching, in the foundation you lay before you ever need it. Serafina's story is a reminder that the most dangerous person in any room is never the one making the most noise. It is the one who has been preparing the longest. What this story means. This is a story about self-respect, about what happens when a woman who has been silent for too long finally decides that her silence has served its purpose. It is about patience as a form of power, about legacy as a form of protection, and about the extraordinary things that become possible when you stop waiting for someone else to recognize your worth and simply act on it yourself. Every woman who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel like a supporting character in her own life will find something true in Serafina's story. Closing call to action. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something you needed to feel today, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it means the world to us. Share this with a woman in your life who deserves to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell us, was Serafina right to wait as long as she did? We read every single response, and if you want more stories of women who rewrote their own endings, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what we bring you next. We will see you in the next story.
What would you do if the man you gave 20 years of your life to, your best years, your silent sacrifices, your unconditional and patient love, stood at an altar with another woman and called it a new beginning? Most women would cry. Most women would beg. Most women would fall apart in some parking lot and spend the next 3 years trying to understand where everything went wrong. Serafina Calloway did none of those things. She put on a sapphire blue suit. She accepted a wedding invitation. She walked into that reception with the posture of a woman who owned every square foot of the room she was standing in, because she did. She owned the room. She owned the building. She owned the company whose name was printed on the catering contract, the floral invoice, and the venue lease. She owned 51.8% of her husband's empire, and she had owned it, quietly and invisibly, for the better part of 2 decades. Tonight, in front of every board member, every investor, every society journalist, and every person who had ever looked through her like she was furniture, she was going to let them know. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a fantasy. This is the story of a woman who was handed the role of background character in someone else's story and spent 20 years quietly rewriting the entire script. This is the story of Serafina Calloway, and it begins, as all great betrayals do, at a party she planned herself. Before we begin, hold on to this thought. It will matter before this story is over. Never let your financial security live entirely inside someone else's name. Remember that. The penthouse on Lakeshore Drive had 34 floors of Chicago beneath it, and a view that made grown men go quiet when they stepped off the elevator for the first time. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan, stretching to the horizon like hammered silver in the late afternoon light. The skyline arranged behind it like a monument to ambition, glass and steel, and the particular kind of power that announces itself without saying a word. Serafina Calloway had lived here for 18 years. She knew every shift of that light, every mood of that lake. She had watched it turn pewter before storms and catch fire at sunset, and go absolutely still on January mornings when the cold pressed down so hard the surface looked like poured concrete. She had stopped seeing it as beautiful a long time ago. It had become, like so many things in this life, simply the backdrop. Tonight the penthouse was full of people, 60 of them precisely, the number having been curated by Serafina over 3 weeks of careful planning. The guest list for the Oak Ridge acquisition celebration had been assembled with the same quiet, invisible precision she brought to everything in her husband's world. She had chosen the caterer, a Michelin-starred team flown in from New York, because Garrett Calloway did not permit anything that was not exceptional. She had selected the flowers. Architectural white garden roses, modern and spare, because Garrett's aesthetic ran cold, and she had learned long ago to decorate for his tastes rather than her own. She had arranged the seating with the strategic intelligence of a general, placing the right investors beside the right board members, ensuring that the conversations Garrett needed to happen would happen organically, as if by pure social accident. She had done all of this, and she had done it without a single acknowledgement from the man it was designed to serve. Garrett Calloway was holding court near the bar. He was a man who commanded space, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed in a navy suit made by a London tailor, silver threading at the cuffs. He was 52 years old and wore success the way some men wear a crown, not as a weight, but as a birthright. His laugh was the loudest thing in the room, a rolling baritone boom that had always made heads turn. She had loved that laugh once, for once. Before she understood what it cost, Serafina stood near the window with a glass of Chablis that had gone warm in her hand. She was 48 years old, and she was, by any honest measure, a striking woman. High cheekbones, dark, watchful eyes, the kind of bone structure that cameras noticed and rooms forgot about, because she had spent 20 years perfecting the art of being present without being seen. She watched her husband. She watched the woman beside him. Vivian Cross was 34 years old, and she was the kind of beautiful that came with an edge, angular and modern, with a sleek blonde bob and pale calculating eyes. She was Calloway Global's head of brand strategy, which was a title that meant she understood exactly how to make something look like one thing when it was entirely another. She was, Serafina had known for nearly 2 years, sleeping with Serafina's husband. It had not announced itself dramatically. It rarely did. It had arrived in the language of small things. A shift in Garrett's cologne, a new deliberateness about his phone screen, the particular quality of his absences, business trips to cities where Callaway Global had no offices, dinner meetings that ran until midnight, the slow geological erosion of his attention, the way a river changes course until one day you look up and realize the water is somewhere entirely different. Serafina had seen the hotel receipts. She had made the calculations. She had sat in this penthouse on a Tuesday afternoon 6 months ago and watched Vivienne touch her husband's lapel on a street corner 40 floors below with a gesture so proprietary and so casual that it confirmed everything she had already known and been holding. Very carefully, very quietly, in both hands. She had said nothing. She had done nothing visible. She had made a phone call. But that was not tonight's story. From across the room, her best friend, Rebecca Hartley, appeared at her elbow with the directness that bypassed small talk entirely. Rebecca was Serafina's oldest friend. They had met at Northwestern 26 years ago, bonded over a shared contempt for a pompous economics professor, and had been inseparable in the deep-rooted way of friendships built on something more solid than proximity. Rebecca was a family law attorney with warm eyes, an explosive laugh, and an absolute intolerance for nonsense dressed up as sophistication. She pressed a fresh glass of wine into Serafina's hand. "He hasn't looked at you once tonight," Rebecca said, her voice pitched just under the ambient noise of the party. "He's focused," Serafina said, her smile unwavering. "She refilled his drink 20 minutes ago, and he touched her wrist when he took the glass." Serafina looked out at the lake. "I know," she said. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "Sorry?" "I'm handling it," Serafina said. She turned and gave Rebecca the warm, real smile she reserved for people who actually knew her. "Trust me." Rebecca studied her for a long moment, the look of someone who suspected she was only seeing half the picture. Then she exhaled. "Fine," she said. "But for what it's worth, this salmon is extraordinary, and you deserve full credit." Serafina laughed. A real one. Across the room, Garrett's boom rolled across the marble. Vivienne leaned into it, her shoulder brushing his arm, her smile angled up at him, like a compass finding north. Serafina watched. She catalogued. She smiled at a passing board member's wife and said something gracious about the roses. The party moved around her like water around a stone, and somewhere across the city, in a suite at the Peninsula Hotel, a set of documents was waiting for their moment. It was not a dramatic discovery. Nobody told you that about the end of a marriage. That it rarely arrived as a scene. No confrontation in a restaurant, no tearful confession, no Hollywood moment with rain and slamming doors. It arrived in ordinary life, tucked inside a Tuesday afternoon, wearing the most unremarkable disguise it could find. For Serafina, it arrived in the breast pocket of a charcoal blazer. She was dropping a collection of Garrett's suits at Henderson's, the dry cleaner on Michigan Avenue they had used for 15 years. Standing at the counter, she did what she always did, checked the pockets automatically before handing the clothes over. Her fingers found a folded piece of paper in the breast pocket of the charcoal blazer. A hotel receipt. The Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C., 2 nights, 1 room, billed to G. Callaway. She knew Garrett's schedule completely. She built it, maintained it, confirmed his reservations. Callaway Global had no offices in Washington. No meetings had been arranged there. She had not booked this hotel. She stood at the counter for a moment that expanded in every direction at once. Mrs. Henderson was saying something pleasant about the weather turning. Outside, a cab honked. Somewhere behind her, a woman laughed. Serafina folded the receipt, put it in her own coat pocket, smiled at the woman behind the counter. "Just the 4 suits today," she said. "Thank you, Patricia." She walked to her car. She sat in the driver's seat. She did not start the engine for 41 minutes. Here's the thing she understood, sitting in that parking lot. The receipt was not information. It was confirmation. It was the period at the end of a sentence she had been reading for 2 years and refusing to finish. She had known. In the way that you can know something in your body long before your mind will permit you to name it, she had known for a very long time. 20 years. Not 20 years of unhappiness. That would have been easier to explain, easier to leave. 20 years of a particular complicated love that had slowly been rerouted, the way rivers get rerouted, through years of small decisions and smaller surrenders, until one day you look up and the water is somewhere else, and you are standing in the dry bed of it, wondering when exactly you stopped being the destination. She picked up her phone, called Rebecca. It rang twice. "I think I already know," Serafina said, before Rebecca could speak. A pause. Then quietly, "How long?" "Part of me has known for 2 years. I was waiting for proof because proof meant having to do something. Sorry, I'm okay," she said. "I'm not okay, but I will be. I just needed to tell someone." She drove home. She smiled at the doorman. She rode the elevator to the 34th floor and walked into the penthouse and made herself a cup of tea with the same precise, automatic movements she used for everything. Measured, efficient, leaving no trace of the earthquake happening underneath. She carried the tea to her private study, the one room in the penthouse that was entirely hers, warm with books and antique maps and the faint familiar scent of lemon verbena. The room Garrett never entered because he found it cluttered. The room that contained the actual Serafina, the one nobody at those parties ever saw. She allowed herself 15 minutes to feel the full weight of what she knew, the grief of it, the particular exhaustion of a woman who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down. Then she picked up her phone and dialed a number she had committed to memory 4 years ago, when she had first understood that this day would eventually come. It rang twice. "Douglas Hale." "Douglas," she said, "it's time to start watching more closely." A brief pause, then the voice of Douglas Hale. 70 years old, 40 of those years spent as chief counsel for Croft Capital, a man who had outlasted every opponent he had ever faced across a negotiating table, said simply, "Understood. I'll make some calls. Here is what you need to know, right now, in the middle of this story." Because Serafina's story is also a lesson. If you are in a relationship where financial transparency has broken down, where you do not know where money goes, where accounts feel monitored rather than shared, that is worth paying attention to, not just emotionally, practically. Know what you own, know what is held in your name alone, know what your exit looks like before you need one. Serafina knew, because her grandfather had insisted on it. Most people learn this lesson far too late. She hung up with Douglas, finished her tea, walked back into the penthouse. She had, she estimated, approximately 3 to 4 more months of playing her part. She was almost exactly right. The evening of the Oak Ridge closing celebration was a Thursday in October. By 11 at night, the guests were gone. The catering team moved through the penthouse with their efficient, practiced invisibility, wrapping flowers, boxing glasses, erasing the evidence of a party with professional thoroughness. The 34th floor was almost quiet. Only 3 people remained. Garrett stood by the window with his jacket off and his tie loosened, a whiskey in his hand, the flush of victory and champagne on his face. He was at the summit of something, the particular charged energy of a man who has just closed the biggest deal of his career and is already looking for the next horizon. Vivian sat on the edge of the white sofa, composed and watchful, her champagne untouched on the coffee table. She was positioned like someone who had been briefed, like someone who knew exactly what was coming next. Serafina stood near the kitchen doorway with her own glass, her expression pleasant and still. She had known this conversation was coming for 3 weeks. She had prepared for it exactly as she prepared for everything, quietly, thoroughly, and in ways that would not be visible until the right moment. "Remarkable evening," Garrett said, turning from the window. "Oak Ridge is ours. I feel extraordinary." "You should," Serafina said. It was a significant achievement. He set down his whiskey. He looked at her, a long, assessing look that she recognized as the look he used before difficult conversations, the look of someone who had already decided and was only now announcing. Then he looked at Vivian, and something moved between them. "Serafina," he said, "we need to talk." She waited. "This hasn't been working for a long time." He moved to the center of the room. "We've been living separate lives. I think you know that. I think we've both known it." Vivian stood from the sofa. She positioned herself slightly behind him, not inserting herself, but present, waiting. "I'm in love with Vivian," Garrett said. The words were delivered with the blunt directness of a man presenting a quarterly report. "I want to build a life with her. What we have, I can't keep pretending." He reached into his jacket. He produced a folder. "My attorneys have prepared the initial terms. I want to be fair. The penthouse. A lump sum of $15 million. Monthly support of $40,000. It's generous, Serafina, and I think you had this printed before tonight's party." Her voice was very quiet, completely still. Garrett paused. "You celebrated with our guests," she said, her eyes on the folder. "You laughed and shook hands and toasted your success with champagne I ordered from a supplier I spent 2 weeks vetting." She looked up at him. "And this was already in your jacket when the first guest arrived." He said nothing. He didn't need to. Serafina looked at the folder for one long moment. Then she took it from his hand, crossed to the coffee table, and set it down with a small, precise click. Not thrown, not crumpled. Set down like something she had examined and found inadequate. "Thank you for your honesty," she said. She looked at Vivian, just long enough for Vivian to understand that she had been seen, not as a rival, not as a threat, but as a person whose choices had been noted and filed away. "Good night," Serafina said. She walked out of the living room. Her heels on the marble were the only sound in the apartment. She did not look back. She took the elevator to the lobby, nodded at James, the night doorman, walked to her car in the underground garage, and sat in the driver's seat with her hands in her lap. And this time, she did not stay steady. In the dark of the garage, alone and completely unseen, Serafina Calloway pressed her palms flat against the steering wheel and leaned her forehead down against them and let herself feel the full, brutal 20-year weight of what had just happened. Not because of Vivian, not because of the folder, because of the party, because of the toasts and the salmon and the board members he had laughed with, and the 3-week seeding chart, and the invisible labor of 20 years of standing exactly where he needed her to stand, and the folder had already been in his pocket before the first guest walked through the door. She stayed in the garage for 22 minutes. Then she straightened, started the car, drove to the Peninsula Hotel, checked into the suite she had reserved 4 days earlier, quietly, under her maiden name, Croft, poured a glass of water, called Douglas. "It's done?" she said. I know, Douglas said. The Tribune ran a brief item this evening. His publicist seeded it. He's already managing the narrative. Then we begin, she said. We already have, Douglas said. Sleep, Serafina. The real work starts tomorrow. She hung up, looked out at the lake from a different angle than she had looked at it for 18 years. It did not look like a cage from here. It looked like a city waiting for someone new to arrive. Douglas Hale's office was in a brownstone on East Delaware Place, a quiet, old-money address that looked nothing like the center of anything significant and was, in fact, one of the most consequential places in Serafina's life. She had been coming here since she was 19 years old. She had sat in the same leather chair across from Douglas's mahogany desk while her grandfather, William Croft, the most patient and methodical man she had ever known, laid out his vision for how she would protect herself in a world that had a habit of forgetting that women needed protection most from the people who claimed to love them. William Croft had built Croft Capital over 40 years, quietly, without press releases, one careful decision at a time. He had taught Serafina that the loudest power in any room was never the most dangerous. He had died when she was 31, leaving behind a will and a trust structure, and a set of instructions so precise and so far-sighted that Douglas had described them privately as a masterwork. The morning after the penthouse confrontation, Serafina sat in that leather chair and listened. The final block of shares was acquired last Thursday, Douglas said, his voice carrying its characteristic dry calm. The Serafina Croft Trust now holds a controlling interest of 51.8% in Callaway Global Logistics. He folded his hands on the desk. He works for you, Douglas said. He simply doesn't know it yet. For 20 years, following her grandfather's instructions and managed by Douglas, Serafina had been systematically and silently acquiring shares in her own husband's company. It had begun as a safety net. William Croft had insisted on it before the wedding. Never let your security rest in a man's hands, my darling. Let it rest in a diversified portfolio and a controlling interest. He had said it in the same office with the same gentle certainty he brought to everything. In the early years of the marriage, when Garrett was building Callaway Global and the relationship still held something real, the trust's acquisitions had been modest and defensive, the financial equivalent of a good seatbelt. She had not been plotting. She had been prudent. But as the years passed and Garrett's ambition curdled into arrogance and his need for conquest spread from the boardroom outward, she had watched him leverage the company to its limits, dismiss cautious voices, fly higher and higher on wings he had built from other people's faith. He had never once looked at the shareholder registry. He was too busy reading his own press coverage. He's going to call it fraud, Serafina said. When he finds out. He'll try, Douglas said, a small, dry smile. The trust was established 14 months before your marriage. Every acquisition was executed through legally separate, independently managed entities. You were always a passive beneficiary, not a directing party. The trust became active only upon the triggering event specified in the original mandate. Marital abandonment, she said, which he triggered himself, Douglas confirmed. The day he filed for divorce, he handed us the key. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the framed photograph on Douglas's desk, her grandfather at his own desk. Sometime in the 1980s, looking entirely at ease with the particular composure of a man who has always thought further ahead than anyone else in the room. I want to proceed as planned, she said. No announcements, no sudden moves. Let him file. Let him believe I'm a discarded wife negotiating her alimony. And the wedding? Douglas asked. She looked at him. He'll have his wedding, she said, I want him standing at the absolute pinnacle of his triumph. I want him certain, comfortable, and completely sure he has won. The higher the climb, Douglas said, the harder the fall, she finished. She allowed herself, that evening, one glass of good Burgundy. She sat in the Peninsula suite and looked out at the city and felt, for the first time since the parking lot, the solid ground of safety beneath her feet. She believed, in that quiet moment, that the worst was behind her. She was wrong. She did not know it yet. Build something in your own name, a savings account that belongs to you, an investment, a skill, a backup plan, not because you distrust your partner, but because you are a complete person separate from your marriage, and you deserve a foundation that is entirely yours. Serafina had this because her grandfather insisted on it. Everyone deserves the wisdom Serafina was given. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the penthouse confrontation. Thick cream paper, gold leaf lettering, her name in precise calligraphy on the inner envelope. Mr. Garrett Calloway and Miss Vivian Cross request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration. Greystone Manor, Lake Michigan Shore, the 14th of April. Serafina read it twice, set it beside her coffee, looked at the lake for a long moment. She had anticipated many things. She had not quite anticipated this. Her phone rang. Rebecca. "Open your laptop," Rebecca said, before Serafina could speak. Her voice was tight and controlled, the voice she used in depositions when she was furious and not showing it. "The Tribune, right now." Serafina reached for her laptop. The headline was in the society section. Calloway divorce. A model of modern maturity. Sources close to the CEO confirm that former wife, Serafina Calloway, has been invited to the upcoming nuptials. Garrett Calloway wanted to show that this transition has been handled with grace and mutual respect, says an insider. Her photo was beside it, an old charity gala photograph. She looked elegant, poised, gracious. The caption read, "The ex-wife." "He engineered it," Rebecca said. "This isn't a kind gesture, sorry. It's a trap. If you go, you're the gracious, broken ex-wife publicly blessing his new marriage. If you don't go, you're the bitter woman who couldn't handle it. Either way, he controls the story. He's already written your role." Serafina held the invitation in her hand and read the newspaper article on her screen at the same time. She felt a cold, clear anger. Not the hot and gasping kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that sharpens rather than blinds. Then Douglas called. She put Rebecca on hold. "Have you seen the Tribune?" she asked. "I have," he said. "And there is something more pressing. Whitmore and Gaines filed an amended petition this morning." She went absolutely still. "They are arguing that the trust constitutes a conflict of interest during the marriage. They want it declared a marital asset subject to equitable distribution. They are calling it financial fraud against the marital estate, the Burgundy she had sipped the night before, the 15 minutes of safety she had allowed herself, the quiet, victorious certainty that she had weathered the worst. Gone." She switched back to Rebecca. "It gets worse." She explained the amended petition. Rebecca's silence had the particular quality of a very skilled attorney recalibrating very quickly. "That is an extraordinarily long shot legally," Rebecca said carefully, "but it creates noise, uncertainty. They want the board to see chaos before Monday's meeting." Her phone buzzed against her cheek. A news alert. She looked at the screen. Vivian Cross. He needed passion. Exclusive interview in Harrington Magazine. She opened it. Serafina was always more of a business partner than a wife. Vivian was quoted as saying, her photograph luminous on the page. Garrett needed to feel alive. He needed someone who matched his energy, his ambition. I think on some level, everyone who knew them understood that. The article had already been shared more than 4,000 times. 3 hits in less than 1 hour. The Tribune story. The legal petition. The magazine interview. She had been prepared for a chess game. She had not been prepared for 3 boards catching fire simultaneously. Her hotel suite door opened. She had given her mother Martha a spare key 2 weeks earlier against her better judgment. Martha Calloway was 69 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and constitutionally incapable of approaching a crisis without baked goods. She walked in carrying a paper bag from the bakery on Walton Street and took one look at her daughter's face. She put the bag on the table. She sat on the sofa. She said nothing. Then Serafina looked at her mother, and the precise, controlled stillness that had held for weeks finally cracked. "Mom," she said. One word. Her voice broke on it. Martha opened her arms, and Serafina, for the first time since the parking lot at the dry cleaner, stopped being in control of anything. She crossed the room and sat beside her mother and cried the way very strong people cry, silently, with her whole body, while Martha held her and said nothing except, "I know, baby, I know." They sat like that for a long time. Eventually, Martha reached into the paper bag and handed her daughter a croissant. "Eat," she said firmly. "Grief burns calories, and you need your strength." Serafina laughed, wet-eyed and exhausted and fractured, but real. Martha patted her knee. "You know what your grandfather used to say? Tell me." "The spider doesn't announce the web." Serafina wiped her eyes, took a long, slow breath, looked at her mother. "No," she said quietly, "it doesn't." She picked up her phone and called Douglas back. "Round 2, she said. The offices of Whitlock and Finch occupied 3 floors of a limestone building on LaSalle Street. They were not showy offices. Dark paneling, deep carpet, framed precedents on the walls, the quiet, settled confidence of a firm that had never needed to impress anyone because their results had always spoken loudly enough. They were specialists in corporate governance and shareholder rights. They operated in 17 countries. They did not lose. Serafina sat at the center of their main conference table with Douglas on her left and a team of 4 attorneys and 2 financial analysts arranged around her. Outside the windows, the Chicago River caught the November light and broke it into pieces. "Walk me through the fraud allegation," she said. "All of it." The lead attorney was a woman named Caroline Marsh. Compact, precise, the kind of professional who had encountered every conceivable variety of financial manipulation and found them all mildly tedious. She laid it out. The trust predated the marriage by 14 months. Every acquisition had been executed through legally independent entities. Serafina had never directed a single trade. Under the original trust mandate, she had been a passive beneficiary with no controlling authority until the triggering event. The triggering event being the divorce filing, Caroline said, which Mr. Calloway initiated. He pulled his own trap. The fraud claim dissolves under basic examination. "So their attorneys know it's a delay tactic," Serafina said, without question. "They want to create noise in the market before Monday. They want the board to see instability and hesitate. If the board hesitates, the vote is less clean. If the vote is less clean, the transition takes longer, and anything can happen in the gap. Then we remove the uncertainty completely," Serafina said. She looked around the table. "What does the board need?" Douglas answered. "They need a leader, not an angry ex-wife, not a hostile takeover, a leader with a plan, with institutional backing, and with a vision for the company that is better than what they have watched Garrett provide." Serafina nodded. She had been building that vision for 18 months. Over the next 2 hours, she laid out her first 100 days. A full audit of the Oak Ridge acquisition, which had been closed at leverage ratios so aggressive, that 3 board members had privately flagged their concerns and had been overruled. A debt restructuring plan, reinvestment in Callaway Global's core logistics technology, which had been starved of capital while Garrett chased acquisitions, a new employee retention initiative, a transparent governance framework that would make the board feel like participants rather than furniture. She had spent 20 years in the passenger seat. She had memorized every road. "What about the Harrington interview?" Douglas asked. "Let it run," Serafina said. "Every woman who reads that article is going to feel something. That feeling is going to make Monday's board meeting the most watched corporate event of the year." She paused. "Vivian just handed us a larger audience." Caroline Marsh allowed herself the slight elevation of one eyebrow that constituted, for her, an expression of genuine approval. "And the wedding?" Douglas asked. Serafina looked at him. "I will be there," she said simply. From the corner of the room, Rebecca, present in her technical capacity as personal counsel, but truthfully present as Serafina's oldest friend, raised her hand with the gravity of someone addressing a matter of great importance. "The outfit question is, I want formally noted, extremely significant. Becca, you are walking into that man's wedding as the owner of his company. This is not a beige moment. This is not tasteful navy. This is a historic moment in your personal and professional life, and the outfit needs to honor that." Serafina looked at her for a long moment. "Sapphire blue," she said. Rebecca pointed. "Yes, exactly that. Burn it all down in blue." Caroline Marsh made a brief note on her legal pad. It read, "Sapphire blue." She underlined it once. When someone tries to rewrite your story, in a newspaper, in a courtroom, in a social circle you have spent years building, the answer is not silence, and it is not explosion. It is preparation. You know what is true. You have documented it. You have found the people who witnessed it. And when the moment comes, you speak with the precision of someone who has been holding their evidence for a very long time. That moment was now 4 months away. Serafina intended to be completely ready. She was. April 14th arrived with a sky of absolute uninterrupted blue. The kind of spring morning that felt engineered for optimism, the weather performing on command for a man who had spent his entire adult life arranging the world to his preferences. Greystone Manor sat at the edge of Lake Michigan like a declaration, 100-year-old estate with stone facades and immaculate grounds rolling down to the water, the kind of property that appeared in architectural journals and old money social columns. Garrett had reserved it for the entire weekend. The security deposit alone had been the size of a substantial mortgage, and he had paid it without blinking. 300 guests arrived through the long gravel drive, white-gloved valets, thousands of white peonies scenting the air from 20 feet away, a string quartet under the portico, vintage champagne at every turn. It was, by every external measure, a perfect event. Vivian Cross was extraordinary in her gown, custom ivory silk with a cathedral train that moved behind her like a statement. She had spent 6 months planning this day, and it showed in every detail. She stood at the altar with the incandescent certainty of a woman who believed she had gotten exactly what she worked for. Garrett at the altar was everything he always was in public, commanding, magnetic, the center of gravity in every room he entered. He had not truly believed Serafina would come. He had sent the invitation as a narrative move, a final brushstroke in the portrait of the amicable modern divorce. If she came, she authenticated the story. If she didn't, she confirmed her irrelevance. He had not considered a third possibility. The ceremony was flawless. Vows exchanged beneath an arch of white flowers with the lake as a backdrop, the kind of image that belonged on a magazine cover. When Garrett said I do, the room responded with the warm, collective exhale of 300 people watching something beautiful. Then the reception moved into the Manor's ballroom. Painted ceilings, warm candlelight, a full jazz orchestra filling the space with the particular elegance of musicians who were genuinely good at what they did. And then, just as the first course was being set, a black Bentley moved slowly up the long gravel drive. The chauffeur, a man named Robert, who had worked for the Croft family for 31 years, opened the rear door. Serafina stepped out. The sapphire suit was bespoke, cut to her precise measurements by a tailor who had spent 3 fittings getting the shoulder line exactly right. It was the blue of deep water on a clear day, old, valuable, and absolutely certain of itself. At her throat, on a fine platinum chain, was the Star of Geneva, a sapphire pendant that had belonged to her grandmother, and before that, to a woman whose name was embroidered inside the original velvet case in handwriting faded to the color of smoke. She wore it not as a weapon. She wore it as a reminder of where she came from and what she was made of. She walked toward the manor entrance. The guests who saw her arrive went quiet in a spreading ripple, a wave of sudden stillness moving through the crowd from the entrance inward. She passed through it with a composure so complete it was almost disorienting. Not cold, not performative, simply utterly present in a way that made everything else in the room seem slightly louder by contrast. She took a seat at table 7, third row from the dance floor, respectful distance, unmistakably present. Throughout the toasts, she sat with her hands folded and her expression one of composed and pleasant attention. She watched the best man deliver a rambling tribute. She watched the maid of honor describe Vivian as a force of nature. She watched the servers move through the room. She ate her salad. Across the ballroom, she could see the board members, men she had cooked dinner for, men who had praised her table arrangements and her wine selections and her ability to make their wives comfortable. She could see them watching her now with a different quality of attention, recalculating. She gave a few of them a small, gracious nod. Then Garrett took the microphone. He was magnificent at this. He had always been. The spotlight found him like a reflex, and he filled it completely, moving through his toast with the easy fluency of a man who had been performing confidence for 3 decades. He praised his new wife. He thanked his guests. He spoke of passion, vision, and new beginnings. And then, with the particular cruelty of someone who believed that the most dangerous weapon was the appearance of generosity, he said, I also want to acknowledge the past, to thank my former wife, Serafina, for her years of support. Her presence here today speaks to the grace and maturity with which we have navigated this transition. He raised his glass. Polite, uncomfortable applause from 300 people who all understood exactly what had just been said beneath the words that were said. He had just put her in a box in front of everyone who mattered. The microphone passed to Genevieve Holloway, the wedding coordinator. A fundamentally kind woman who was operating at the outer limit of her social composure and who, in the next 10 seconds, would make what would later be described in various accounts as either the most heroic act of mischief or the most catastrophic professional miscalculation of her career. That was so beautiful, Genevieve said into the microphone, her voice slightly unsteady. Serafina, you look absolutely lovely tonight. A pause. Would you perhaps like to say a few words to wish the happy couple well? The ballroom went completely silent. Every eye in the room found Serafina at the same moment. She did not look startled. She did not look flustered. She looked ready. She gave Genevieve a small, reassuring smile. The smile of a woman who has just been handed exactly what she needed by someone who had no idea what they were offering. Then she stood. The distance from table 7 to the center of the ballroom was perhaps 40 feet. She covered it slowly and deliberately, with a quality of movement that silenced the jazz orchestra mid-phrase without a single word being spoken. The only sound was the precise, measured rhythm of her heels on the polished marble. A sound that, in the absolute silence of 300 people holding their breath, carried all the weight of everything that was about to happen. She accepted the microphone gently from Genevieve's hand. She adjusted the stand to her height. She looked out at the room. 300 faces, board members, investors, society figures. 3 reporters from financial journals who had been invited to document a glorious union and were currently experiencing the professional equivalent of winning a lottery. Garrett and Vivian at the center of the dance floor, lit by warm spotlight, very still. Serafina smiled. It was a warm smile, a real one. That was what made it so completely devastating. "Thank you, Genevieve," she said. Her voice was clear, unhurried, filling the room without effort. "And thank you, Garrett, for your kind words. Support, grace, new beginnings. These are beautiful phrases." The room exhaled. She was going to be gracious. She was going to wish them well, and everyone could go back to their champagne, and this excruciating moment would be over. "I spent 20 years being gracious," she continued, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly. Still warm, but with something beneath it now. Something with precise edges. Being the quiet one. The one in the background who made sure every room Garrett walked into was already arranged to his advantage. The dinners, the relationships, the board introductions that happened over desserts I planned, in rooms I decorated, at tables I set. A pause. I was extraordinary at it. Not a sound in the room. What Garrett never thought to ask, and I say this without malice, simply as an observation about the particular blindness that can develop over 20 years of looking through someone, was what I was doing with the other part of my attention. Her gaze shifted. At table 9, Lord Ashworth, a distinguished British institutional investor who had arrived quietly that morning and had been sitting in unassuming patience through the entire event, gave her the smallest possible nod. She turned back to the room. My grandfather, William Croft, some of you will remember him as the founder of Croft Capital, gave me advice on the week of my wedding. He told me, never let your future rest entirely in someone else's hands. He established a trust for me, a private trust, with a very specific long-term mandate. Garrett's face had changed. The color was leaving it in real time. For 20 years, Serafina said, the Serafina Croft Trust, under the management of Douglas Hale of Hale and Associates, has been quietly, patiently, and entirely legally acquiring shares in Callaway Global Logistics through independent investment vehicles, through funds, through institutional partners who understood the value of patience. She paused, just long enough. Garrett was so focused on the horizon that he never looked at the shareholder registry. He never asked who owned the conservatively named investment funds that were so consistently eager to believe in his vision. Vivian's hand found Garrett's arm. Her grip was white-knuckled. He assumed, Serafina said, her voice dropping in register, becoming cooler, more precise, the voice of a boardroom rather than a ballroom, that the person standing in the background was simply standing in the background. She let 3 full seconds of silence pass. 3 seconds in a room that had stopped breathing is a very long time. As of last Thursday, the Serafina Croft Trust is the majority shareholder of Callaway Global Logistics, with a controlling interest of 51.8%. The sound that came from 300 people losing the ability to breathe simultaneously was extraordinary. Not a scream, not applause, a collective physical shock, the sound of sophisticated people encountering something they had not imagined possible. Vivian made a sound that was not a word. Garrett's face was the color of good paper. I am therefore calling an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors for this Monday at 9 a.m. Serafina said, her voice carrying the full authority of someone who has been waiting a very long time to speak. The primary agenda item will be a vote on executive leadership. My attorneys at Whitlock and Finch are available to answer any procedural questions. She looked at Garrett, just for one moment. The look of a woman who has finally said the thing she's been holding for 20 years and found that it was even more complete than she imagined. Congratulations to the happy couple, she said. The salmon is excellent. I chose the supplier myself. She placed the microphone back on its stand. She turned. She walked toward the ballroom doors. Behind her, 300 people detonated. It was not loud chaos. Not in a room full of people trained to maintain composure under pressure. It was a frantic, urgent implosion. Phones appeared in every hand. Investors were texting brokers. Board members were pulling each other into corners with expressions of barely controlled alarm. The 3 financial reporters were typing with the barely suppressed velocity of people who have just watched history happen in a room they were already standing in. Garrett moved. He pushed through the stunned crowd with an urgency that was completely unlike him. Unpolished, uncontrolled, all of the performance stripped away. Serafina. She stopped at the ballroom doors, turned. His face was a landscape she had never seen before. All the things 20 years of performance had kept hidden suddenly, right there on the surface. Rage, yes, and beneath it, something raw, something that was, in its own terrible way, the most honest thing he had shown her since she could not remember when. How could you, he said. You wanted a public moment, she said, quietly, for him alone. You wanted everyone who matters to be in this room. You sent me the invitation, Garrett. You wrote this particular script. I simply added a scene you hadn't written. This is my company. I built it. You built it, she agreed. And then you leveraged it, past its limits, and dismissed the people who warned you and called their caution weakness. You were a remarkable builder. The building needed different management. You'll fight me, he said. The bravado was hollow, a habit without substance. Your attorneys are excellent divorce lawyers, she said. Mine are corporate governance specialists. The bylaws are clear. The vote Monday is a formality. You can attend as the outgoing chief executive, or you can tender your resignation tonight. A steady look. Either way, clear your office by noon. Vivian had followed him. Her gown moved around her, like something from a different story than the one she was currently living. Her face had lost everything it had worn all day, the triumph, the luminous certainty, the confidence of a woman who believed she had gotten exactly what she came for. You calculating which, she said. Her voice cracked the middle of it. Serafina looked at her, not with cruelty, not with warmth, but with the particular clarity of someone who has finished something and is ready to begin the next thing. You wanted to be queen of this kingdom, she said quietly. You should have done your due diligence on who owned the land. She turned. The doors opened. Robert had the Bentley at the bottom of the entrance steps. She walked toward it without looking back. Behind her, from somewhere in the crowd departing through the manor doors, came the sound of Martha Calloway, who had spent the entire evening at table 4 eating her dinner with the composed satisfaction of a woman watching a film she had been promised would have a very good ending, saying to the woman beside her in a tone of complete and genuine pride, "That's my daughter." Then she picked up her evening bag and walked out. The story broke at 11:47 that night. Bloomberg. Serafina Croft Calloway announces 51.8% controlling stake in Callaway Global at husband's wedding reception. Emergency board meeting called. By midnight, it had reached the Financial Times. By 1 in the morning, Reuters had it. By 3 a.m., it was the most shared financial story in the world. The narrative was irresistible. The scorned wife, the 20 years of patience, the corporate takeover delivered from a wedding reception microphone in a sapphire blue suit, while the groom stood 12 feet away with the color draining from his face. It was Shakespearean, and it was real, and every journalist in the country wanted to be the one who told it best. By Sunday morning, the story was front page everywhere. Photos of Serafina at the microphone, poised, clear-eyed, utterly in command, were published beside images of Garrett at the edge of the dance floor, his face the portrait of a man watching the ground disappear beneath his feet. The contrast was so complete and so cinematic that several publications ran them side by side without a single word of caption. Garrett and Vivian spent their wedding night in the conference room of Whitmore and Gaines. The attorneys who had spent 3 months preparing for a high-value divorce settlement were now staring at 20 years of impeccably structured share acquisitions routed through 14 independent legal entities. Lead counsel Robert Whitmore, a man who had not admitted professional defeat in 30 years of practice, looked at his client across the conference table at 2 in the morning and said, "She built a fortress around your company while you were busy building a monument to yourself. Every acquisition is ironclad. Every entity is clean. There is nothing to challenge." Garrett said nothing for a long time. "What are my options?" he said finally. "You attend Monday's meeting and get publicly removed by a board she now controls, or you resign tonight and keep the smallest possible fragment of your professional dignity." Whitmore paused. "I have never in 30 years advised a client to surrender. I am advising you to resign." Vivian sat across the table, wrapped in a hotel cardigan, pulled over her ivory wedding gown. The name she had coveted, the power she had wanted, the position she had worked toward with such focused patience. All of it was still technically present. She was Mrs. Calloway, on paper, legally. But the company was Serafina's. The board was Serafina's. The story that would appear in every newspaper in the country tomorrow morning was Serafina's. She was married to the most famous corporate casualty in modern American business history. Across the city, Serafina was celebrating. She was at Whitlock and Finch. The team was assembled around the conference table. Douglas, who had flown in from his winter home in Florida, Rebecca, in her serious sweater, Caroline Marsh with her legal pads, and 2 financial analysts. Outside the windows, the Chicago River was dark and still. Press release. Trading suspension request. Audit announcement outline. Investor outreach sequencing. Board member calls at first light. The message going out in layers, precisely timed. "The stock opens down Monday morning," said her analyst. "A careful young man named William Grant. The market hates uncertainty." "Then we give them certainty," Serafina said. She was calm in the way that comes after a very long period of preparation, not distant, but settled. The release goes out at 9:01 Monday morning. Interim CEO appointment effective immediately. Audit announced. Restructuring plan outlined. We are not the chaos. We are the answer to the chaos. She worked until 4 in the morning. Then she sent everyone home. She sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, a glass of water in her hand, looking at the river below. She felt not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter and more durable than either. She felt for the first time in a very long time like herself. At 10 o'clock Sunday evening, a single-page letter arrived at Whitlock and Finch by private courier. The resignation of Garrett William Calloway as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Calloway Global Logistics, effective immediately. Serafina read it once, set it on the table. Get some rest, she told Douglas, who was the only one remaining. Tomorrow, the real work begins. When everything falls apart in ways you did not plan and did not deserve, the most powerful thing you can do is not revenge. It is not the grand gesture. It is the next right move, just the next one. Serafina did not spend that Sunday night celebrating. She spent it working. That is the difference between a moment of justice and a life rebuilt. Monday morning arrived gray and quiet, a soft April drizzle that turned Lake Michigan the color of pewter and pressed the city's hard edges into something gentler. The lobby of Callaway Global Tower was a controlled circus. Press lined the perimeter behind security barriers. Camera crews from 4 networks. Financial journalists who had been up all night filing their stories were now arranged in a semicircle, waiting for the final act. At 8:45, a black Bentley pulled to the private executive entrance on the building's south side. Serafina stepped out. Charcoal gray dress, clean, precise lines, her grandmother's watch on her wrist. Simple, classic, without a single unnecessary flourish. Her hair in its signature sweep. No sapphire today, no Star of Geneva. She had needed the armor on Saturday, when she was walking into someone else's event. Today she was walking into her own building. She did not need the armor. She was the armor. She walked through the lobby she owned without looking at the press. Douglas was at her left shoulder. Caroline Marsh and 2 colleagues from Whitlock and Finch formed the rest of the group. They rode the elevator to the 50th floor in silence. The boardroom was a room Serafina had been adjacent to for 20 years, collecting Garrett for dinners, waiting in the antechamber during long meetings, existing in the perpetual orbit of a place she had never been invited into as a principal. She knew the room the way she knew the penthouse, as backdrop, as context, as someone else's space. She walked to the center of the long table and sat down. Not at the head, at the center. A deliberate and unmistakable signal. This is a different kind of leadership than the room has been accustomed to. The board members, 7 men who had been Garrett's allies for years, and who were now, with the pragmatic clarity of people whose fiduciary duty had just sharpened their vision considerably, watchful and recalculating, sat around the table with the expressions of people who had made their peace with what was about to happen. "Good morning," Serafina said. Her voice was the same as it had been on Saturday night, clear, unhurried, carrying the particular quiet authority of someone who has nothing left to prove and nowhere else to be. "You have all received the resignation. I am putting forward a motion to appoint myself interim Chief Executive Officer and Chairwoman of the Board, effective immediately." Douglas seconded the motion. There was no discussion. There was no need for discussion. The vote was unanimous. She spent the next 90 minutes not celebrating, but governing. She laid out the audit in specific detail. The Oak Ridge acquisition, the leverage ratios, the 3 board members who had flagged concerns and been dismissed, whose caution she named and validated in front of the full board. She could see those 3 men sit slightly differently in their chairs when she did that. She had understood it would matter to them. She presented the restructuring plan, precise, documented, already reviewed by Caroline's team and Douglas's network of institutional contacts. It was not a plan created in the aftermath of Saturday's revelation. It was a plan that had been 18 months in development, built the way her grandfather had built everything, with patience, with specificity, with a long view. She talked about Callaway Global's employees. 4,000 people who had come to work on Monday morning not knowing whether the company they depended on would still be recognizable by the afternoon. She named the retention initiative. She named the transparency framework. She named the technology reinvestment that had been deferred for 3 years of acquisitions and would begin in the first quarter. Garrett was a builder, she said, near the end, her tone measured and genuine. I want to honor that. He built something real, but the building developed structural problems, and the people responsible for identifying those problems were not permitted to speak. She looked around the table. That changes today. Thomas Reed, the youngest board member, raised his hand. Garrett's severance, he said. His contract contains a standard morality clause, Serafina said without hesitation. His actions have caused demonstrable reputational harm to the company and created quantifiable risk to shareholder value. I believe those actions constitute a clear violation. He will receive his vested pension as required by law, nothing more. Some board members looked at the table. One quietly nodded. The meeting ended at 10:45. Serafina walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and stood looking out at the city while her team gathered their materials. The drizzle had not lifted. Chicago was gray and purposeful below. The lake flat and silver, the streets moving with the ordinary serious business of a Monday morning. She had stood at a window like this for 18 years. It did not look the same. 6 weeks later, on a clear evening in late May, Serafina stood at those same windows in what had been remade into her office. Garrett's aesthetic, the chrome, the glass, the deliberate coldness of a space designed to remind visitors how much smaller they were than the person behind the desk, was gone. Warm wood, deep chairs, books on actual shelves, arranged for reading rather than appearance. A painting her mother had given her, something soft and coastal that Martha had been keeping in her guest room for 15 years, waiting for Serafina to have a wall that belonged to her. On the corner of the desk, in a simple silver frame, a photograph of William Croft at his own desk sometime in the 1980s, looking entirely at ease with the settled composure of a man who had always thought further about ahead than anyone else in the room. She stood at the windows in the late afternoon light and looked at the city. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number, a text message. You took everything from me. She looked at it for a moment. She thought about everything that sentence contained. The 20 years, the silences, the folder placed on the coffee table, the word, service delivered, in the voice of a man dismissing a contractor. The hotel receipt in the parking lot on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She thought about the parking garage. She thought about her mother's kitchen. She thought about her grandfather's voice and Douglas's office when she was 19 years old, laying out a vision of how to protect yourself in a world that forgot too often to do it for you. She deleted the message, set the phone face down on the desk, turned back to the window. Outside, the lake caught the last of the evening sun and scattered it across the surface in long gold lines. Extravagant, unhurried, indifferent to everything beneath it, and beautiful in precisely the way it had always been beautiful. All the years, she had been too busy being background to notice. The reign of Serafina Croft Callaway had begun. The most radical act of self-respect is knowing which messages do not deserve a reply. And so Serafina Callaway rewrote her own story. She did not do it loudly. She did not do it in anger, though she had every right to anger. She did it in the patient, deliberate language of a woman who had understood for a very long time that the most powerful thing in any room is never the person speaking the loudest. It is the person who has been preparing the longest. She transformed the greatest betrayal of her life into the most complete reclamation. She did not just survive what was done to her. She used it. She turned 20 years of being underestimated into 20 years of architecture, building something so solid, so carefully constructed, so deeply rooted in the inheritance of a man who loved her enough to think 40 years ahead, that when the moment arrived, it did not require a fight. It required a microphone in 30 seconds and the absolute unshakable certainty of a woman who had finally decided to stop standing in the background of her own life. Was Serafina's plan justified? Was her response too far or not far enough? We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is a conversation worth having. If this story moved something in you, if any part of it felt familiar or inspiring or like something you needed to hear today, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with a woman in your life who needs to be reminded of her own strength. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of extraordinary women who refuse to accept the ending someone else wrote for them. Click the notification bell so you never miss what we bring you next. Thank you for listening. And remember, the spider does not announce the web. The content you have just experienced was independently researched, carefully constructed, and manually edited by our team, built not for clicks, but for meaning. Every word was chosen with intention. Every story we tell is designed to leave you with something that lasts longer than the time it took to listen. Thank you for being here.